What if I told you that before corn ever dominated this continent, indigenous peoples were growing supercrops so nutritious, so resilient, and so powerful that colonial empires had to ban them just to break native resistance? For thousands of years, these plants fed entire civilizations. Then colonization, government policy, and big agriculture quietly erased them from our fields and our memories. Today, we're uncovering 10 of these forgotten crops, including one that proves North America had its own quinoa long before Europeans arrived. This knowledge was never lost. It was buried. The first supercrop on our list is grain amaranth, the so-called forbidden seed that terrified an empire. Before the Spanish conquest, amaranth fields stretched across Mesoamerica. The Aztecs called it huautli, and it wasn't just food. It was woven into their spiritual ceremonies, mixed with honey and shaped into images of their gods. That's exactly why the conquistadors burned the fields and outlawed its cultivation. Grow it, and you faced punishment. The goal was simple: destroy the crop, destroy the culture. Here's the kicker. Amaranth contains more protein than wheat, all 9 essential amino acids, and more calcium than milk. It thrives in poor soil and drought. A crop this powerful couldn't be allowed to survive in a system built on control. So they erased it, pushed maize and wheat instead, and let centuries pass. Today you can buy quinoa at any grocery store, but the grain that once fed empires sits forgotten. Makes you wonder who decided what we were allowed to remember. The second supercrop is Manoomin, the sacred wild rice of the Great Lakes that's been under siege for over a century. Long before any Europeans set foot on this continent, the Ojibwe and neighboring nations were harvesting this grain by canoe, bending the stalks and knocking the seeds into their boats. It wasn't just food, it was prophecy, medicine, identity. Manoomin is packed with protein, fiber, and B vitamins, and it grows in water without a single input from industrial agriculture. That's the problem. Dams flooded its habitat. Logging destabilized shorelines. Pollution poisoned the waters. And when the market wanted cheap wild rice, they grew it in paddies in California and sold it under the same name. The real thing, hand-harvested and ecologically sacred, couldn't compete with industrial imitation. Government policy did nothing to protect it. The system had no room for a crop that belongs to a lake and a people instead of a corporation. Today, you can find wild rice at the supermarket, but most of it has never seen a canoe. The sacred grain is still out there, but it's been pushed to the margins while corn fills the shelves. The third supercrop is the American groundnut, also called hopness, the forgotten tuber that once saved colonists from starvation. This climbing vine with its strings of protein-rich tubers grew wild across the eastern woodlands for centuries. Indigenous peoples cultivated it as a reliable food source, and when the first European settlers were starving, it was hopness that kept them alive through brutal winters. Some historians believe it was part of the original Thanksgiving. Here's the wild part. This tuber contains 3 times more protein than a potato. It's a perennial, meaning it comes back year after year. It fixes nitrogen in the soil. And unlike potatoes, it doesn't need replanting every season. So why have you never heard of it? Because the USDA and agricultural extension offices spent the next 2 centuries pushing European crops: potatoes, wheat, corn. Hopness was never bred, never marketed, never given a chance. It became a weed in a system obsessed with annual monocultures and uniform rows. The plant that once saved lives is now tangled in forgotten hedgerows, waiting for someone to remember. If you're finding value in this, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps this video reach more people who deserve to know what's been buried. All right, let's keep going. The fourth supercrop is the Tepary bean, a drought-defying desert legume that big agriculture left behind because it didn't need what they were selling. For thousands of years, the Tohono O'odham and other Sonoran desert peoples grew Tepary beans using only summer monsoon rains. No irrigation, no fertilizer, just ancient floodwater farming techniques passed down through generations. Tepary beans are loaded with protein and fiber, and they have one of the lowest glycemic indexes of any bean, making them ideal for managing blood sugar. But here's where it gets interesting. When industrial agriculture arrived with its center pivot irrigation and chemical inputs, Tepary beans became obsolete overnight. Why would seed companies and fertilizer manufacturers promote a crop that thrives on neglect? The system wanted beans that depended on purchased water and synthetic nutrients. Teparies needed nothing but rain and knowledge, so breeders ignored them, policy bypassed them, and commodity markets flooded the shelves with pintos and kidneys grown on borrowed water. Today, as aquifers collapse and drought spreads across the Southwest, the bean that was bred for this exact future sits waiting in seed banks. We traded resilience for dependence and called it progress. The fifth supercrop is mesquite pod flour, the sweet desert staple that government agencies literally poisoned out of existence. Before colonization, mesquite trees were the backbone of desert food systems from Texas to Arizona and deep into Mexico. Indigenous peoples ground the pods into a flour that was high in protein, rich in fiber, and low on the glycemic index. It tasted like molasses and cinnamon without spiking blood sugar. Entire communities survived on mesquite when other food sources failed. Then came the ranchers. Federal range improvement programs declared mesquite a nuisance tree, competition for cattle grass. They sprayed it with herbicides. They bulldozed it. They chained entire groves to the ground. The goal was more pasture, more beef, more profit. Meanwhile, the sugar and wheat industries had no interest in promoting a wild, unpatentable sweetener that grew without inputs. Mesquite didn't fit the industrial model, so they called it trash brush and tried to erase it. Today, you can pay premium prices for mesquite flour at specialty stores, while high-fructose corn syrup dominates every aisle. The irony is painful. The sixth supercrop is the Jerusalem artichoke, also known as the sunchoke, a perennial native sunflower that keeps giving food year after year without asking permission. Indigenous peoples across North America cultivated sunchokes long before European contact, and early colonists quickly adopted them. The tubers are rich in inulin, a prebiotic fiber that feeds gut bacteria, and they store well through winter. Here's the kicker. Unlike corn or potatoes, sunchokes are perennial. Plant them once and they return every year, spreading quietly underground. They don't need replanting. They don't need much care. And that's exactly why industrial agriculture rejected them. Sunchokes are knobbly, irregular, and impossible to process on high-speed factory lines. They spread on their own terms, which makes them a nightmare for monoculture systems designed around control. Supermarkets wanted smooth, uniform potatoes that photograph well and stack neatly. Seed companies wanted annuals you have to buy again each season. A crop that feeds you forever without permission cannot be owned, and what cannot be owned cannot be sold. So sunchokes became a curiosity, a farmer's market novelty, while patented corn hybrids took over the world. The seventh supercrop is the prairie turnip, known as Timsila among the Lakota, the breadroot that once anchored survival across the Great Plains. For countless generations, indigenous women harvested these starchy tubers during summer travels, braiding them into long ropes that dried for winter storage. Prairie turnips were a foundational carbohydrate, reliable and nutritious, threaded into the rhythm of buffalo hunting and seasonal movement. Then the plows came. The Homestead Act carved the tall grass prairie into wheat fields. Later, corn and soybeans finished the job. The deep-rooted prairie ecosystem that Timsila needed was ripped apart acre by acre. And this is where the story turns dark. It wasn't just habitat destruction. Forced settlement onto reservations broke the seasonal foraging patterns that kept prairie turnip knowledge alive. The plant didn't just lose its land. It lost its people's freedom to harvest it. Today, Timsila survives on scattered hillsides, hidden behind endless rows of subsidized corn and the hum of center pivot irrigation. The breadroot is still out there, but you have to know where to look. The 8th supercrop is pitseed goosefoot, the centerpiece of an entire forgotten grain system that proves north. America had its own quinoa centuries before European contact. This is the one most people have never heard of, and that's not an accident. Before maize spread north from Mexico, indigenous peoples in the eastern woodlands were cultivating a complex of native seed crops: goosefoot, maygrass, little barley, erect knotweed. Archaeologists call it the Eastern Agricultural Complex, and it fed communities for over 1,000 years. Goosefoot seeds are protein-rich and easy to store. They were a true domesticated grain, bred larger and more productive over generations. Then maize arrived, outcompeting the local crops, and later European wheat and barley finished the job. The old grains were abandoned. Their descendants were reclassified as weeds, sprayed and plowed under in the corn and soy belt. An entire indigenous grain tradition was quietly put to sleep, so imported crops could rewrite the agricultural history of this continent. Makes you wonder what else we lost before anyone thought to write it down. The 9th supercrop is the native sunflower landrace, the original multi-purpose plant that became a corporate symbol while its ancestors were locked away in seed vaults. Sunflowers were first domesticated right here in North America, likely in the river valleys of the eastern woodlands and parts of Mexico. Indigenous peoples grew them not just for oil, but for food, dye, medicine, and ceremony. The seeds were roasted, ground into flour, and pressed into cakes. Different communities maintained different varieties suited to their climates and needs. Then came industrial breeding. In the 20th century, sunflowers were transformed into a global oilseed commodity. Hybrid programs narrowed the genetic base to maximize oil content and uniform harvest. Seed patents concentrated ownership. The old landraces, with their diversity of colors and uses, became obsolete in a system designed for refineries and supermarket bottles. Today, most people know sunflowers as a cheerful garden decoration or an anonymous ingredient in cooking oil. The sacred solar symbol that once anchored village food security now sits in cold storage at government facilities while corporations sell you the same patented hybrid year after year. The flower remembers. The market forgot. The 10th supercrop is Chia, the Aztec running seed that was banned as pagan and then reborn as a smoothie ingredient without its story. Before the Spanish conquest, Chia was one of the 4 pillars of Mesoamerican agriculture alongside corn, beans, and amaranth. Warriors carried it on long journeys. It was paid as tribute to rulers. The seeds are dense with omega-3 fatty acids, fiber, and protein, a concentrated fuel source that needed no preparation. Spanish priests saw its role in indigenous ritual and moved to suppress it. They promoted European grains and discouraged planting. For centuries, Chia faded into the margins of Mexican agriculture. Then something strange happened. In the 21st century, Chia exploded onto health food shelves as a superfood. But here's the wild part. Most of the chia sold today is grown in Australia, Argentina, and industrial operations far from its homeland. The people who first cultivated it rarely benefit from the boom. The sacred seed was suppressed, nearly forgotten, and then commodified by the same global system that tried to erase it. You can buy chia at any grocery store now. but the story of who grew it and why it mattered has been quietly left off the label. So what does all this tell us? 10 crops. 10 stories of abundance turned to absence. The pattern is impossible to ignore. These weren't random losses. They were choices made by empires, governments, and corporations who decided that control mattered more than resilience, that profit mattered more than heritage, that uniformity mattered more than diversity. For centuries, the message was clear. Only approved crops deserve space in the field. Indigenous knowledge was rebranded as primitive. Native plants were reclassified as weeds. And generations grew up never knowing what had been taken from them. But here's the truth. They don't want you to understand. These crops are still here. The seeds survived in small gardens, in seed banks, in the hands of communities who refused to forget. Every time you plant amaranth or harvest sunchokes or cook with Tepary beans, you're not just gardening. You're participating in an act of quiet rebellion. You're telling a different story about what belongs in the soil and who gets to decide. The knowledge was never truly lost. It was just waiting for someone to remember. If this opened your eyes to something, give it a like and subscribe for more forgotten wisdom. The knowledge is still out there. We just have to remember it. Thanks for watching.